They didn't just ruin my graduation cake. They ruined the last illusion I had about my family. The backyard looked perfect that evening. String lights glowed softly overhead. The smell of grilled food drifted through the air, layered with laughter and music. From the outside, it looked like love. Like one of those families people envy. But I was standing inside it. And I felt invisible. My name, Maya, was written in thin silver letters on the cake. Congratulations, Maya. It sat at the far end of the table, pushed beside empty soda cans and paper plates, like an afterthought. No one cared enough to move back to the center. No one asked about my degree. No one asked about the nights I worked just to afford finishing it. They were too busy listening to my younger sister, Claire, talk about her upcoming vacation, while my mother proudly announced she'd helped pay for it. I smiled when I was supposed to. That's what I'd always done. Then my nephew ran toward the table. He was 10. Old enough to know better. He looked at the cake, then at me, and grinned. Mom says you only got your degree so you can brag, he said loudly. Laughter followed. Comfortable. Sharp. Familiar. I waited for someone to stop him. My father stayed glued to his phone. My sister lifted her drink, pretending to hide her smile. My mother laughed openly, like this moment pleased her. Then the cake slid. His hands shoved the plate forward. The porcelain hit the ground, and frosting splattered across my shoes. There were gasps at first. Then laughter again. Someone even said, "Oh come on, it's just cake." I stood there holding the knife I'd been using to cut slices. My hands didn't shake. My chest didn't tighten. What broke wasn't loud. It was quiet. My mother finally looked at me and said, "Don't be so sensitive, Maya." I set the knife down, untied the apron, and walked away while their laughter followed me into the dark like music from a party I was never invited to. I didn't cry in the car. I didn't scream. I just drove. Because somewhere between the frosting on the ground and my mother's laugh, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't an accident. This was who they were. And I was still paying the price for staying. I thought leaving that night was the hardest thing I'd ever do. I was wrong. The message waiting on my phone would prove that walking away was only the beginning. By the time I reached my apartment, it was past midnight. The city outside my window was quiet, washed in rain, streetlights blurring into long reflections on the pavement. I dropped my keys on the counter and stood there longer than I needed to, listening to the silence. It felt unfamiliar, like a room I hadn't learned how to exist in yet. My phone buzzed. For a brief, foolish moment, I thought it might be an apology. A message saying they'd gone too far. That someone, somewhere, had realized what that night had cost me. Instead, it was my mother. "We've decided to cut all contact. Don't come back. Don't call. This is what's best for the family." A second later, a small notification appeared beneath it. My sister, Claire, had reacted with a heart. I stared at the screen, waiting for something to happen inside me. Pain. Anger. Grief. But nothing came. It felt like my body had finally stopped trying to argue with the truth. They hadn't pushed me away because I left. They pushed me away because I no longer fit the role they needed me to play. I placed the phone face down and sat at the kitchen table. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping against the glass in uneven rhythms. I opened my laptop, more out of habit than intention, and the screen lit up an old spreadsheet I hadn't touched in months. My budget. 2 lines stared back at me. One was labeled Parents, Home Loan. The other read Claire, Vehicle Loan. Both were marked as co-signed. Both were set to auto-withdraw. Every month, money left my account and disappeared into a family that had just erased me with a text. I remembered my mother's voice when she'd asked me to sign. You're the responsible one. You don't have kids. You can handle it. I remembered Claire promising it was temporary. Just until things got easier. 3 years later, I was still paying. And tonight, I was no longer family. Something shifted in my chest. It wasn't rage. It wasn't sadness. It was clarity. I scrolled through old messages. Years of gentle pressure disguised as gratitude. Excuses wrapped in guilt. Promises that never arrived. Next month, they always said. Next month never came. I opened a new message and typed slowly, deliberately. I will be removing myself from all financial agreements I am co-signed on. Effective immediately. No explanations. No anger. No emojis. I hit send and placed the phone face down. For the first time that night, I breathed deeply. They had chosen silence. I chose myself. I thought sending that message would end things quietly. I underestimated how much power people lose when their safety net disappears. By morning, my phone would prove just how replaceable love becomes when money is involved. Morning came without sleep. The gray light outside my window made everything look stripped bare, like the world had been washed clean of excuses. I brewed coffee I barely tasted and sat at the table, staring at my phone as if it were something dangerous. It didn't stay quiet for long. First, 1 missed call. Then 3. Then 10. By the time I checked, there were over 50 notifications. My mother. My father. Claire. Numbers I didn't recognize, all from my hometown. Voicemails stacked on top of each other like demands that refused to wait their turn. I opened one. Maya, what do you think you're doing? My mother snapped. Do you have any idea what you've done to us? Another message followed immediately. You've gone too far. We raised you. You owe us. Not one message said, I'm sorry. I didn't reply. Instead, I put on a sweater, tied my hair back, and left my apartment. The air was cold and sharp, biting at my cheeks as I walked the few blocks to the bank. Each step felt heavier than the last, but also steadier, like I was finally moving in a direction that belonged to me. Inside, everything smelled like paper and polish. A man in his 50s greeted me with a calm smile and wire-rimmed glasses. His name was Daniel Ortiz. I've reviewed the documents you sent, he said once we were seated. I believe I understand your situation. I explained everything. The co-signed loans. The automatic payments. The family pressure disguised as responsibility. I expected judgment. Or skepticism. Instead, he nodded. You'd be surprised how often this happens, he said. Family is one of the most common ways people lose financial control. He slid a stack of papers toward me. If you can show you have no ownership in the property or vehicle, we can begin the co-borrower removal process. We can also freeze joint access to your credit. My hands trembled as I opened the folder I'd brought. Lease agreements. Pay stubs. Old messages from my mother confirming the house wasn't mine. Proof I'd never benefited from any of it. Daniel flipped through the pages carefully, then looked up. This is sufficient. He made a call. Spoke quietly. Efficiently. When he hung up, he looked at me again. We'll begin the process immediately. The sound of his pen clicking against the desk was small, but it echoed inside me like something monumental. For the first time, I wasn't asking permission. I was reclaiming myself. I thought the bank would be the hardest part. I was wrong again. 3 days later, my family showed up at my door, and this time, they weren't laughing. 3 days passed. The calls slowed. The messages turned sharper. Accusations replaced guilt, and guilt gave way to panic. I stopped listening to the voicemails. I already knew what they said. Then, on the third evening, there was a knock. Not a polite one. Not hesitant. It was loud. Angry. Relentless. Each rattled through the thin walls of my apartment like a warning. I froze in the kitchen, the pan on the stove hissing behind me. Before I even checked the screen, I knew who it was. The intercom camera flickered on. My mother stood in the hallway, arms crossed, lips pressed into a tight line. Beside her was Claire, eyes wide, face drawn, fury and desperation fighting for control. "Maya," my mother shouted through the door. "Open this right now. We need to talk." Talk. That word had always meant surrender. I didn't move. "What did you tell the bank?" Claire yelled. "They froze everything. My car is about to be taken. You've destroyed us." Destroyed. The word hit hard, not because it hurt, but because it sounded familiar. That's how they'd always described me when I stopped fixing their problems. I took a breath and opened the recording app on my phone. "Seattle Police Department," I said quietly into the emergency line. "There are 2 people outside my apartment refusing to leave. I'd like to report trespassing." The pounding grew louder. "We're your family," my mother screamed. "You don't treat family like criminals." 10 minutes later, red and blue lights washed over the hallway. 2 officers stepped into view, calm and professional, their presence instantly shifting the air. My mother rushed toward them, pointing at my door. "That's my daughter. She ruined our credit. We just want to talk to her." Claire started crying. Loud. Performative. "She doesn't care if we lose everything." One of the officers raised a hand gently. "Ma'am, this is private property. If she's asked you to leave, you need to leave." "I'm her mother," she snapped. "I have rights." "You have rights," the officer said evenly, "but not the right to trespass." For the first time, they were being told no by someone who wouldn't bend. Through the intercom, I spoke calmly. "If you come back again, I'll file a restraining order." Silence followed. Then footsteps. Heavy. Defeated. Moving away. When the hallway was quiet again, I slid down against the wall, my hands trembling, not from fear but from release. The door stayed closed. And for the first time in my life, that felt like freedom. I thought that would be the end of it. But when control is gone, some people try to destroy your name instead. The next morning, my mother made sure everyone knew her version of the story. The next morning, my phone felt heavier than usual. Not because it was ringing, but because it wasn't. No missed calls. No threats. No guilt-laced messages. Just silence. And somehow, that silence felt calculated. I opened social media. At the top of my feed was my mother's post. Large letters. Careful wording. The kind meant to look reasonable while cutting deep. Sometimes the child you trust the most betrays you in the worst way. After everything we sacrificed, our daughter stole from us and destroyed our credit. Some people never learn gratitude. My stomach tightened, but my hands stayed steady. Below it were comments from neighbors, relatives, people who had watched me grow up and still felt entitled to judge me. So ungrateful. Poor parents. I always knew something was off about her. One comment landed harder than the rest. "I heard she used her parents' money to buy her apartment." I stared at the screen for a long moment. The old version of me would have panicked. Typed paragraphs. Explained every detail. Begged to be understood. That version believed the truth only mattered if people listened. This version knew better. I closed the app. Then I opened my email and wrote a short, professional message to my workplace. "If you come across any rumors involving my family, please disregard them. I'm handling a personal matter and appreciate your privacy." No emotion. No defense. Just boundaries. I sent it and shut my laptop. That afternoon, an envelope arrived at my door. The bank's logo was printed cleanly across the front. Inside was an official letter confirming the process had begun, my name removed from the loans, my liability formally released. I held the paper in my hands longer than necessary, tracing the edges like it might disappear if I let go. It wasn't revenge. It was relief. That evening, the post vanished. Maybe someone corrected her. Maybe the bank called. Maybe the lies finally collapsed under their own weight. I didn't care which. Later that night, a message came through from an unknown number. You think you've won? You'll regret this. I stared at it briefly, then deleted it. Winning had never been the goal. Peace was. A year later, I received one message I never expected. 6 words that came far too late. And in that moment, I had to decide whether freedom meant reopening the door, or leaving it closed. Time has a way of softening noise. Weeks passed, then months. The messages stopped. The rumors faded. Life settled into something calm, almost unfamiliar. The silence that once terrified me slowly became something I protected. I focused on work. Finished a project that earned me a quiet promotion. During a meeting, my manager said, "Maya, people trust you. You're steady." No obligation in her voice. No hidden cost. At home, my days found a rhythm. Morning walks. Coffee by the window. Friends who showed up without needing anything from me. Laughter that didn't feel borrowed. I stopped being the backup plan. The safety net. The one who stayed. A year later, my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in a long time. Claire. The message was short. I'm sorry for everything. No excuses. No explanations. Just 6 words. I read it once. Then again. The old instinct rose quietly, the urge to fix things, to respond, to carry the weight so others wouldn't have to. That instinct had shaped my entire life. But I didn't act on it. I set the phone down and stood by the window instead. Outside, the city moved on. Cars passed. Lights flickered on. Somewhere, people laughed over dinner, unaware of the small, invisible victories happening inside quiet apartments like mine. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't always mean reopening the door. Sometimes it means closing it gently and walking away without anger. I never replied. Not because I hated her. But because I finally loved myself enough to stop reopening old wounds. That night, I baked a small cake. Nothing elaborate. Just enough for one. I placed it on the table and sat across from it, smiling at the simplicity of the moment. No audience. No laughter. No one waiting to take something from me. Just peace. If you've ever been the one expected to stay silent, to sacrifice, to be strong, at your own expense, this isn't weakness leaving. It's freedom arriving. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away without explaining why. If this story felt familiar, you're not alone. Share your thoughts below, your voice matters here. And subscribe to Echoes of Karma for more stories about boundaries, betrayal, and reclaiming your power.